They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but in the world of New York high society, revenge is best served on the cover of Vanity Fair. Everyone in Manhattan heard what Greg Montgomery said at that charity gala. He didn't just divorce his wife of 20 years, he humiliated her. He laughed, clinking his Scotch glass, and told half of Wall Street that Catherine was expired goods, too old to date, and that he was trading her in for a newer model. He thought she was finished. He thought she would fade into the background, clutching her alimony check. He was wrong, dead wrong, because 1 week later, the world woke up to a photo that shattered the internet, and Greg's ego along with it. This is the story of how the expired wife brought a billionaire to his knees. The invitation to the crumbling of Catherine Montgomery's life didn't come in a wax-sealed envelope. It came over a plate of cold risotto at Le Cuckoo. Catherine sat across from Greg, her husband of 19 years. At 44, Catherine was undeniably striking. She possessed a timeless elegance, the kind that didn't scream for attention, but commanded it. She had the posture of a former ballerina, and eyes that held the intelligence of the woman who had ghost-written half of Greg's business proposals during his early lean years. But tonight, Greg wasn't looking at her. He was looking through her, his eyes darting to the buzzing iPhone face down on the white tablecloth. Greg Montgomery was a man who had aged like a hedge fund portfolio, volatile and artificially inflated. He was handsome in a generic, corporate way, with silvering temples he spent a fortune maintaining. He had just closed the deal of a lifetime with the Sterling Group, cementing his status as one of the city's top real estate developers. "You're not listening, Kat," Greg said, his voice laced with an irritation that had become his default setting over the last 6 months. "I am listening, Greg," Catherine replied, her voice steady. "You said you need space, but usually space doesn't involve moving your assistant into the penthouse while I'm visiting my mother in Connecticut." Greg flinched. He hated being caught, but he hated being wrong even more. He took a long swig of his wine. "Look, let's not do this here. The point is, we've evolved in different directions. You're comfortable. You like the garden, the books, the quiet life. I'm just hitting my prime. I need energy. I need vitality." Catherine placed her fork down. The metallic clink sounded like a gunshot in the hushed restaurant. "Vitality? Is that what we're calling Sienna now? She's 23, Greg. She was in kindergarten when we bought our first apartment." "She understands the modern world," Greg snapped, his voice rising, drawing glances from the table where the editor-in-chief of The Cut was dining. "She's an influencer. She has vision. And frankly, Catherine, look at you. You're great. You're a great mother to the kids. But you're done. You're in the autumn of your life. I'm just starting my summer." The cruelty of it wasn't just the words, it was the casualness. He spoke as if he were discussing the trade-in value of a used Mercedes. "So that's it?" Catherine asked, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. 19 years. I gave up my position at the gallery to manage your life, to raise our sons, to host your dinners. And now I'm done." Greg signaled for the check, refusing to meet her eyes. "It's just biology, Kat. Don't make it messy. I'm being generous. You'll keep the house in Greenwich. I'll take the Tribeca penthouse. It's better this way. You don't have to try so hard anymore. You can just relax. Be a grandmother eventually. That's more your speed now." He tossed his Amex black card onto the tray. "I have a flight to Milan tonight. Sienna is shooting a campaign there. Have your lawyer call mine by Monday." He stood up, adjusted his bespoke suit jacket, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Catherine sat alone, surrounded by the murmur of Manhattan's elite, realizing that the man she had built her entire life around hadn't just left her. He had dismissed her existence entirely. She didn't cry. Not there. She simply signaled the waiter. "Another glass of Pinot Noir?" the waiter asked gently. "No, Catherine said, her eyes hardening into cold steel. "Bring me the tequila. The expensive stuff." If the dinner was the injury, the gala 3 days later was the infection. It was the annual Metropolitan Builders Charity Ball, the biggest night of the year for Greg's industry. Catherine had been disinvited, obviously. Greg had made it clear via a text message that his +1 situation had changed. But Catherine Montgomery was not a woman who hid in the dark. She was on the board of the charity. She had organized the seating chart. She had chosen the floral arrangements. She attended alone. She wore a vintage black Dior gown, understated, severe, and utterly chic. She walked in with her head high, greeting old friends, smiling through the pain. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Greg arrived. He entered like a conquering king, with Sienna hanging off his arm. Sienna was undeniably beautiful, wearing a dress that was little more than sequins and good intentions. She was glowing, vibrant, and loud. Greg was beaming, introducing her to his partners, to the press, to the people Catherine had known for decades. The whispers started immediately. "Is that her? The nanny?" "No, that's the Instagram model. The one with the swimwear line." Look at Catherine, standing there like a statue. It's tragic, really. Later in the evening, the alcohol was flowing, and Greg, emboldened by the adoration of his sycophants, held court at the main bar. He didn't realize, or perhaps didn't care, that Catherine was standing just on the other side of a large floral partition, close enough to hear every word. He was talking to Chip Henderson, and minor tech mogul, distinctively known as the Vulture for his hostile takeovers. "You look like a new man, Greg," Chip laughed, slapping him on the back. "I feel like a new man," Greg boomed. "Shedding the dead weight, boys. That's the secret to longevity." "Was it hard, the split?" the Vulture asked. "Hard. It was a relief," Greg scoffed. "Catherine is a good woman, sure, but let's be real. She's too old to date. Who's going to pick her up now? She's 44 with 2 grown kids and an obsession with 19th century art. She's practically a museum piece herself." The men laughed, a gross, guttural sound. "I did her a favor," Greg continued, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I set her free to go knit or whatever it is women her age do. A man like me? I need someone who looks good on a yacht, someone who keeps me young." Catherine was dragging me towards the grave. Honestly, I give it a year before she's living with 6 cats and talking to her plants. No high-value man touches a woman past her expiration date. On the other side of the partition, Catherine's hand gripped her clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. It wasn't the rejection that stung. It was the erasure. He was erasing her history, her desirability, her womanhood. He was telling the world she was garbage. She took a deep breath. She could storm around the corner and throw her drink in his face. It would be satisfying. It would make a scene. No, she thought. That's what a bitter ex-wife does. That's what he expects. Catherine turned on her heel and walked towards the exit. She walked past the paparazzi, past the glittering lights of the Pierre Hotel, and into the cool New York night. She took her phone out of her purse. She scrolled past her lawyer's number. She scrolled past her mother's number. She stopped at a contact she hadn't dialed in 12 years. A contact saved simply as SK. Her thumb hovered over the call button. 12 years ago, before she had fully committed to the role of Greg's wife, Catherine had a life in London. She had a career in art restoration that put her in the orbit of some very powerful, very private people. One of them had begged her not to marry Greg. One of them had told her that Greg was a suit with a hollow chest, while she was a star that needed a sky. She hadn't listened then. She pressed the call button now. It rang once, twice. "Catherine?" A deep voice answered. It wasn't a question of who it was. He knew. It was a question of why now. The voice was raspy, cultured, and unmistakably powerful. "Hello, Sebastian," Catherine said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It's been a long time," the voice replied. There was no judgment, only curiosity. "To what do I owe the pleasure? I heard about the merger and the Other news. He thinks I'm expired, Sebastian, Catherine said, staring at the lights of the city reflected in a puddle. He told everyone tonight that I'm too old to date, that I'm finished. A low, dark chuckle resonated through the phone line. It was a dangerous sound. Greg Montgomery has always been a man of limited vision. He sees a sunset and thinks the day is ending. He doesn't realize the night is when the real things come out to play. I don't want pity, Sebastian, she said. I don't give pity, Catherine. You know that. I give opportunities. There was a pause, the sound of a heavy tumbler being set down on a wooden desk, thousands of miles away. I'm docking the Aurora in New York on Tuesday. I have a photo shoot scheduled for the cover of Time regarding the new clean energy initiative. They want the reclusive billionaire angle. I told them I'd only do it if I had the right partner by my side. Someone who represents timeless power. Catherine closed her eyes. She knew exactly what he was offering. It wasn't just a date. It was a declaration of war. Tuesday? She asked. Tuesday, Sebastian confirmed. Wear the red dress, the one you wore in Vienna. I don't have it anymore. Then I'll have one made. Goodbye, Catherine. The line went dead. Catherine lowered the phone. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. Greg wanted a younger model? Fine. She was about to show him what a classic looked like when it was framed in gold. For the next 5 days, Catherine Montgomery vanished. Greg loved it. He assumed she was wallowing. He told his friends at the squash club, she's probably up in Connecticut, crying into a Chardonnay. It's sad, really, but you have to cut the cord. He was living his best life. He and Sienna were photographed at Nobu, at the Knicks game, courtside, naturally, and shopping in Soho. Sienna posted everything. Every latte, every kiss, every new handbag Greg bought her was documented for her. For 5 million followers. So grateful for this man and this new chapter. #soulmate, #new beginnings, #age is just a number. She captioned a photo of Greg's hand on her thigh in his Porsche. Greg felt invincible. The Sterling Group deal was moving to the final signature phase. He was the king of New York real estate. He had the money, the status, and the young, hot girlfriend. On Tuesday morning, Greg sat in his office on the 40th floor, overlooking the Hudson River. He was sipping an espresso, waiting for his lawyer to bring in the final divorce papers for him to review. He wanted to make sure the alimony was as low as legally possible, maintenance for a lifestyle she no longer has, he called it. His assistant, a young man named David, knocked on the door. David looked pale. He was holding an iPad as if it were a bomb. "Mr. Montgomery," David squeaked. "What is it, David? I'm busy." "Sir, have you seen the news? Or social media?" Greg rolled his eyes. "I don't check social media, David. I have people for that." "Did Sienna post something cute?" "No, sir, it's your ex-wife." Greg laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. "Catherine? Did she join Facebook? Did she post a picture of her cat?" David didn't smile. He walked over and placed the iPad on Greg's mahogany desk. It wasn't a cat picture. It was a leaked preview of the upcoming Time magazine cover, set to hit newsstands globally the next morning. But the digital version was already trending #1 on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. The headline was bold, white text against a black background. "The return of the King's Sebastian Kincaid breaks his silence." But it wasn't the headline that made the air leave Greg's lungs. It was the photo. In the center of the frame stood Sebastian Kincaid. The Sebastian Kincaid. The man worth $80 billion. The man who owned shipping lines, tech conglomerates, and half of the copper mines in Chile. He was known for being aggressively private, dangerously intelligent, and incredibly handsome in a rugged, dark way. And draped over him, looking not like a victim, but like a queen who had just conquered a nation, was Catherine. She was wearing a dress of liquid red silk that clung to every curve, proving that her expiration date was a myth. Her hair was swept back, revealing a diamond necklace that Greg recognized immediately as the Star of the South, a piece rumor said Kincaid had bought at auction for $20 million. Sebastian's hand was possessively on her waist. Catherine was looking directly into the camera lens with a smirk that could freeze hell over. It was a look of absolute, unadulterated power. The subheadline read, "The Billionaire and His Muse. Kincaid announces marriage to art historian Catherine Montgomery and appoints her director of the Kincaid Foundation." "Marriage?" Greg whispered, the words strangling him. "Read the article, sir," David said softly. Greg scrolled down, his fingers trembling. In a shocking twist, elusive billionaire Sebastian Kincaid has announced his engagement to Catherine Montgomery. "I have loved her for 15 years, Kincaid told Time. "I waited for her to be free." Some men chase trends. I chase masterpieces. Catherine is the only woman who challenges me, the only woman with the intellect to run my foundation. She is the opposite of fast fashion. She is couture. Greg felt bile rise in his throat. Fast fashion. It was a direct hit, a missile aimed right at Sienna. This has to be fake," Greg stammered. She was making meatloaf last week. She doesn't know Sebastian Kincaid." "Apparently they have a history from her time in London," David said, checking his phone. "Sir, you might want to see the comments." "I don't want to see the comments," Greg yelled. But he looked. At Wall Street baddie, did Greg Montgomery really fumble this goddess for a TikToker? LMAO. At Finance Bro 99. Wait, Kincaid just called Montgomery's ex a masterpiece and implied his new girl is fast fashion. The shade is lethal. At Art Lover NYC, Catherine looks 30. Money and freedom look good on her. Greg who? Then Greg's office phone rang. It was the CEO of the Sterling Group, the deal Greg had just closed. "Greg," the CEO's voice was icy. "Bill, good morning. I assume you saw the—" "I saw it. Greg, we have a problem. The financing for the Hudson Yards project? It was being underwritten by Kincaid Capital." Greg's blood ran cold. "So, a contract is a contract." Kincaid just pulled the plug. He invoked the character clause. He said he doesn't do business with men who possess poor judgment in asset management. He said if you can't value a woman like Catherine, you can't be trusted to value a $1 billion tower. "He can't do that," Greg screamed. "He just did." "The deal is dead, Greg, and the board is asking for a meeting. Today." Greg dropped the phone. He looked at the iPad again. Catherine's face stared back at him, calm, beautiful, and utterly out of his league. She hadn't just moved on. She had moved up, to the stratosphere. The weeks that followed were a blur of media frenzy. Catherine didn't just appear on the cover of Time. She was everywhere, yet nowhere. She gave no interviews, spoke to no reporters. She let Sebastian do the talking, and Sebastian spoke only of her brilliance. Sienna, initially, tried to fight back. She posted a crying video on TikTok titled, "Why Billionaires Are Bullies," trying to garner sympathy. "It's not fair," Sienna sobbed into the camera, wearing a perfectly torn sweatshirt. "Just because she's old and knows some rich guy doesn't mean she can bully us. Greg and I are in love. True love wins." It backfired spectacularly. The internet detectives dug up old tweets of Sienna making fun of older women. They compared Catherine's credentials, art history degree from Oxford, board member of 3 charities, with Sienna's, promoted a tea that makes you hallucinate. The public sentiment swung violently toward Catherine. She became an icon for every woman who had ever been traded in. Meanwhile, Greg's life was entering a tailspin. The Sterling deal collapse had cost his firm nearly $50 million in projected revenue. His partners were furious. He was bleeding cash, and the social ostracization was immediate. New York society is fickle. They follow the biggest shark. Greg was a barracuda. Sebastian Kincaid was a megalodon. No one wanted to be seen with the man who had insulted the future Mrs. Kincaid. Greg sat in his penthouse, the one he had fought so hard to keep, alone. Sienna was out networking, which lately meant partying with rappers who had more followers than Greg. The doorbell rang. Greg opened it to find a courier. He signed for a thick envelope. It was from the Kincaid Foundation. He tore it open. Inside was a single, heavy cardstock invitation. You are cordially invited to the engagement gala of Sebastian Kincaid and Catherine Montgomery. Saturday, the 24th of June. The Plaza Hotel. Black tie. There was a handwritten note at the bottom, in elegant, swirling script. Catherine's handwriting. Greg, bring Sienna. I think she'd enjoy the chocolate fountain. Cat. It was a power move of nuclear proportions. Inviting him was an insult. Not inviting him would have been fear. Inviting him meant she didn't care. She wanted him to see. She wanted him to watch. She's bluffing, Greg muttered, crumpling the note. She thinks I won't come. She thinks I'm ashamed. He walked to the mirror. He looked tired. The stress lines were deepening. He needed to prove he was still a player. He needed to show Kincaid that he wasn't intimidated. I'm going, he told his reflection, and I'm going to win her back. The delusion had set in. Greg actually believed that Catherine was doing all of this, the billionaire, the cover, the gala, to make him jealous. He convinced himself that if he showed up, looked him in the eye, and apologized, she would drop the charade and come home. He grabbed his phone and texted Sienna, "Get a dress, a real one. We're going to the Plaza." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel had not seen a gathering like this since the Truman Capote black and white ball. It was a congregation of the world's true power players, not just the loud money of New York real estate, but the quiet, terrifying money of Swiss banking, rare earth mineral mining, and old European aristocracies. Greg Montgomery stepped out of his black limousine, adjusting his bow tie. His palms were sweating, a sensation he hadn't felt since his first job interview 25 years ago. Beside him, Sienna struggled to exit the car. She was wearing a neon pink dress with cutouts that would have been perfect for a Coachella after-party, but looked violently out of place amidst the sea of black velvet and heavy silk entering the hotel. "Greg, the paparazzi aren't taking pictures of us," Sienna whined, clutching her phone. "Why are they pointing their cameras the other way?" Greg looked. Indeed, the wall of photographers was ignoring him completely, their lenses trained on a sleek, nondescript sedan arriving behind them. Out stepped the Prime Minister of Italy. "Just keep walking, Sienna," Greg hissed, gripping her elbow a little too hard, "and put the phone away. No live streaming. But my followers want to see the chocolate fountain." "There is no chocolate fountain. This is a black tie gala, not a sweet 16. They entered the ballroom, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The room was a masterpiece of intimidation. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling. A 40-piece orchestra played softly in the corner. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. As Greg navigated the room, he felt the eyes. They weren't admiring. They were dissecting. He spotted Chip Henderson, his old squash partner, standing near the bar. Greg forced a smile and approached. "Chip, good to see you. How's the wife?" Chip turned, his face tightening. He didn't extend his hand. "Greg, I'm surprised you're here." "Why wouldn't I be? Catherine and I are amicable. We have a history." "History is the right word," Chip said coldly. "By the way, I'm moving my accounts to Kincaid's bank next week. Just business, you understand?" Chip turned his back before Greg could respond. It was a direct cut. The cut direct. In this society, it was worse than a slap in the face. It was social death. Greg grabbed a glass of champagne, downing it in one gulp. Sienna had wandered off to find good lighting, leaving him exposed. Then the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the grand staircase. The orchestra swelled. Sebastian Kincaid appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked like a modern-day Caesar in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He exuded a dangerous kind of calm. He waited a beat, extending his hand. Catherine stepped into the light. The room collectively gasped. If the time cover was impressive, this was transcendent. She wore a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that left her shoulders bare, the fabric pooling around her feet like liquid night. Around her neck was the Kincaid blue, a sapphire necklace that hadn't been seen in public since 1956. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, revealing the elegant curve of her neck, the same neck Greg had once complained was getting wrinkly. She didn't look 44. She didn't look 25. She looked timeless. She looked like a woman who owned the oxygen in the room. They descended the stairs together, not like a new couple, but like a unified front. She looks different, Greg whispered to himself. It wasn't just the clothes or the jewels. It was her posture. The slump of the unappreciated housewife was gone, replaced by the steel spine of a matriarch. Sebastian took the microphone at the bottom of the stairs. "Welcome!" His deep voice boomed, silencing the room instantly. "Tonight isn't just a celebration of my engagement to the remarkable Catherine. It is an apology." A murmur went through the crowd. "An apology to the world," Sebastian continued, looking adoringly at Catherine, "for depriving it of this woman's brilliance for so long. For years, Catherine has been the silent engine behind lesser men." Greg felt every head in the room swivel toward him. "But tonight, we unveil the Kincaid Montgomery Arts Initiative, a $2 billion endowment to preserve global heritage sites, directed solely by my future wife. She isn't just my partner, she is the boss." Applause thundered. Catherine smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that Greg hadn't seen in a decade. Greg felt a surge of irrational anger. Lesser men? That was him. Kincaid was mocking him to his face. "I need to talk to her," Greg muttered. He waited. He watched. An hour later he saw his opening. Sebastian was pulled away by the governor of New York. Catherine was standing alone on the terrace balcony, looking out over Central Park. Greg pushed past a waiter and slipped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool. "Hello, Cat." Catherine didn't jump. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a slow sip of her drink, then pivoted. Her expression was polite, distant, the way one looks at a stranger who has confusingly wandered into their home. "Greg," she said, "I see you brought the child. Is she enjoying the open bar?" "Stop it." Greg stepped closer, using his business voice, the one he used to close deals. "Drop the act, Catherine. It's just us now." "There is no act, Greg, and there is no us." "Come on," Greg scoffed, leaning against the stone railing, trying to look casual. "I know what this is. You hooked a whale to make me jealous. Point taken, you look great. You won. But let's be real. You're not going to marry Sebastian Kincaid. The guy eats countries for breakfast. You're my cat. You like gardening and PBS mysteries." Catherine looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "You really didn't know me at all, did you? For 19 years you slept next to me, and you never bothered to learn who I was." "I know you better than he does," Greg snapped, his composure cracking. "I know you're terrified of thunder. I know you hate cilantro. Does he know that?" "He knows that I speak fluent Italian." "Do you?" Catherine countered softly. "He knows that I wrote my thesis on Renaissance restoration." "Do you?" "He knows that I have a brain, Greg. You only ever cared that I had a pulse and a dinner reservation." "I made you comfortable," Greg shouted, his face reddening. "I gave you a life of luxury." "You gave me a cage with gilded bars and told me to be grateful for the view." She stepped closer, her scent, something exotic and spicy, not her usual lavender, filling his nose. "And when I started to rust a little, you tried to throw me in the trash. You told the world I was expired goods." "I was drunk. It was locker room talk." "It was the truth," she said. "It was your truth. But here is the reality, Greg. Sebastian didn't pick me up because I was a charity case. He pursued me because he needed an equal, something you were too insecure to handle. Greg laughed, a cruel, desperate sound. An equal? Please. You're a trophy cat. Just an older, more expensive trophy. Once he gets bored, he'll dump you just like I did. And you'll have nothing. Actually, a voice came from the shadows. Greg spun around. Sebastian Kincaid stepped out from the darkness of the balcony corner. He hadn't been with the governor. He had been watching. Sebastian didn't look angry. He looked like a predator watching a wounded rabbit. He walked over and wrapped an arm around Catherine's waist, pulling her flush against him. You have a fundamental misunderstanding of assets, Mr. Montgomery, Sebastian said smoothly. You invest in depreciating assets, sports cars, trends, youth, things that lose value every second. I invest in appreciating assets, wine, art, land, and wisdom. Catherine is worth more today than she was 20 years ago because of her experience. You threw away a diamond because you wanted a piece of glitter. You're bankrupting me, Greg accused, his finger shaking as he pointed at Sebastian. You killed the Sterling deal. You're blacklisting me from the banks. That's illegal. It's interference. Sebastian smiled, showing teeth. It's the free market, Greg. The market has decided you are a bad investment. I didn't tell anyone to blacklist you. I simply told them that if they do business with you, they don't do business with me. They made their choice. I can sue you. You can try, Sebastian said dismissively, but I'd save your money. You're going to need it for the alimony. I'm not paying her alimony, Greg spat. She's marrying a billionaire. Catherine stepped forward, her eyes flashing. Oh, Greg, you didn't read the invite closely, did you? This is an engagement party. The wedding isn't for 2 years. Greg blinked. What? We're taking a long engagement. Catherine smiled sweetly, which means, legally, I am still a single woman, and per our divorce settlement, until I remarry, you owe me $25,000 a month. Greg's jaw dropped. You're going to bleed me? While living with him? Every single penny, Catherine whispered. I'm going to use it to fund a scholarship for women who want to restart their careers after their husbands leave them. I'm calling it the Gregory Montgomery Grant for Second Chances. It will be very public. Greg felt the walls closing in. He looked from Catherine's cold, triumphant face to Sebastian's amused smirk. He realized then that this wasn't just a breakup. It was a dissection. Suddenly, the glass door to the balcony slid open with a bang. Sienna stumbled out, holding her phone up, the flash blindingly bright. "Greg, there you are," she squealed, slurring her words. "Oh my God, is that Sebastian Kincaid? Hi, I'm Sienna. I love your boat." She thrust the phone into Sebastian's face. "Say hi to my followers." Sebastian looked at the phone, then at Greg. He raised an eyebrow. "Your vitality seems to be calling, Greg." Greg looked at Sienna, messy, drunk, oblivious. Then he looked at Catherine, regal, composed, powerful. The contrast was so stark it was physically painful. "Let's go inside, my love," Sebastian said to Catherine, turning his back on Greg completely. "The Prime Minister wants to discuss that restoration project in Florence." "Of course," Catherine said. She didn't look back at Greg. Not even once. Greg was left standing on the cold balcony with a drunk influencer and the realization that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But the night wasn't over, and the twist that was coming would make the financial ruin seem like a mercy. As Greg dragged Sienna out of the party, humiliated, his phone buzzed. It was an anonymous text. No number, just a file attachment. He opened it in the back of his limo. It was a photo, a grainy black and white photo from 20 years ago. It showed a young Sebastian Kincaid standing in a London pub, and standing next to him, laughing, with her hand on his chest, was a young Catherine. But it was the timestamp that froze Greg's blood. The photo was dated 3 weeks before Greg had proposed to Catherine, and the text underneath read, "You didn't discard her, Greg. She was waiting for the right time to leave, and now she has the leverage. Check your company's blind trust investors. Greg stared at the screen. His real estate empire was funded by several blind trusts. Silent investors he didn't know the names of. He frantically logged into his secure portal. He traced the routing numbers of his biggest debt holder, the entity that owned the mortgage on his office building, his penthouse, and his developments. The shell company was called Aurora Holdings. Aurora, the name of Sebastian's yacht. Greg dropped the phone. Catherine hadn't just moved on to a billionaire. She and the billionaire effectively owned him, and he had just handed them the keys to his destruction by challenging them. Sunday morning didn't break. It shattered. Greg woke up in his penthouse, not to the smell of coffee or the sound of Sienna's mindless scrolling, but to the silence of an empty apartment. His phone, however, was screaming. He had 47 missed calls, 12 from his CFO, 6 from his lawyer, 3 from page 6, and 1 from the building management. He sat up, his head pounding from the cheap champagne he'd chugged in the limo ride home. He opened his email. The subject line at the top, flagged as high priority, read, "Notice of default, Aurora Holdings." Greg's hands shook as he opened the attachment. It was a formal demand letter. Aurora Holdings, the majority debt holder for his Tribeca development and his personal asset portfolio, was exercising a clause in the contract known as a material adverse change. Because Greg's reputation had tanked, resulting in the loss of the sterling deal, his credit rating had plummeted overnight. Aurora was calling in the loan. All of it. $300 million. Due in 48 hours. "He can't do this," Greg rasped, scrambling out of bed. "This is a vendetta." He ran into the living room to find Sienna. "Sienna, we need to pack. We're going to the Hamptons' house until this blows over." The living room was empty, but the closet door was open. Greg ran to it. Sienna's side was bare. The Gucci bags, the Louboutin, the jewelry he had bought her to prove he was still rich, all gone. On the kitchen counter there wasn't a note. There was just his black card, cut in half with a pair of kitchen shears. He checked Instagram. There it was, a story posted 2 hours ago. Sienna was sitting in the first-class cabin of a flight to Dubai. "Sometimes you have to walk away from toxicity to find your peace. Dubai, I'm coming home. #single life, #know your worth," she had tagged a Dubai property tycoon in the corner of the photo. Greg sank onto the floor. He was alone. He was broke. And the walls of his penthouse, the penthouse he had fought Catherine for, were technically owned by his ex-wife's billionaire fiancé. By Monday afternoon, Greg was in a dim, smoke-filled office in Queens. He couldn't afford his usual high-end fixers anymore. He was meeting with a private investigator named Carl, a man who charged by the hour and didn't ask moral questions. Greg threw the grainy black-and-white photo of Catherine and Sebastian onto the desk. "I need to know everything," Greg said, his eyes bloodshot. "They said she knew him 20 years ago. I need dirt. I need to prove that she cheated on me, or that they were colluding. If I can prove fraud, I can void the divorce settlement and maybe stop the foreclosure." Carl picked up the photo. He adjusted his glasses. "I did the dig you asked for this morning, Mr. Montgomery. It wasn't hard. You just never looked." "What do you mean?" Carl opened a manila folder. "You met Catherine in 2004, right? She was working as an assistant curator at the Tate Modern in London." "Yes, she was quiet, shy. A bookworm." "She wasn't just a bookworm," Carl said, sliding a document across the desk. "Before she met you, Catherine was Sebastian Kincaid's personal art broker." Greg stared at the paper. It was an old employment contract. "She wasn't his girlfriend," Carl corrected. "She was his fixer. Kincaid was young, aggressive, and making enemies fast. He needed someone with class, someone with an impeccable reputation to smooth things over with the old European families so he could buy their assets. That was Catherine. She was the velvet glove over his iron fist. She brokered deals worth millions before she turned 25. "That's impossible," Greg stammered. "Catherine? She knits. She manages the house staff. She chose to knit, Carl said bluntly. According to my sources, Kincaid proposed to her in 2004. He offered her the world. He wanted them to be a power couple. He wanted her to run his European division. And she said no. Greg was stunned. Why? Why would she choose me? I was a junior developer with a leased BMW. He was... him. Carl pulled out a photocopy of an old medical record. Because Kincaid was dangerous back then. He was involved in high-risk corporate raids. There were threats against his life. Catherine wanted a family. She wanted safety. She wanted to be a mother more than she wanted to be a CEO. So she walked away from the billions. She met you a week later. You were safe. You were boring. You were the white picket fence guy. Greg felt like he'd been punched in the gut. For 19 years he had told himself that he had rescued Catherine, that he had given her a life, that she was lucky to have him. The truth was the opposite. She had settled for him. She had dimmed her own light to fit into his small suburban life. She had used her brilliance to edit his emails, to design his dinner parties, to charm his investors, all while pretending to be just a supportive wife. She built me, Greg whispered. My first big deal. The Hanover project. She introduced me to the investors at a dinner party. I thought it was luck. It wasn't luck, Carl said, closing the folder. It was her. She called in favors from her old life to help you start yours, and you never even knew. Greg stood up. He felt sick. He had called her expired. He had called her useless. And the whole time, she was the architect of his entire existence. Underscore. 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 Greg walked out of the PI's office into the blinding afternoon sun. His phone buzzed again. It was David, his former assistant, who had quit that morning. Turn on the TV. CNBC. Now. Greg stumbled into a nearby sports bar. The bartender looked at him, disheveled, suit wrinkled, tie loose, but changed the channel. The screen showed a press conference. Sebastian Kincaid was at the podium. Catherine stood next to him, looking severe and professional in a grey power suit. The ticker at the bottom read, Kincaid Capital acquires Montgomery Development Group assets in fire sale. Ladies and gentlemen, Sebastian spoke to the cameras. Due to the insolvency of Montgomery Development, Kincaid Capital has acquired their debt obligations. However, we are not interested in real estate development. He turned to look at Catherine. We are interested in accountability. We have discovered significant irregularities in the way the previous management, specifically Mr. Gregory Montgomery, handled pension funds for his employees. Greg's heart stopped. He hadn't stolen the money, but he had borrowed against it. It was a grey area, a risky move he made to pay for Sienna's jewelry and the new penthouse renovations. He planned to pay it back before anyone noticed. My fiancée, Catherine, has a keen eye for detail, Sebastian continued. She noticed the discrepancies in the public filings yesterday. As the new owner of the debt, we have an obligation to report this to the SEC and the district attorney. Catherine stepped up to the microphone. She looked directly into the camera. Her eyes were cold. We believe in justice, she said, her voice steady. No one is above the scrutiny of the law, not even men who think they are untouchable. The bar went silent. Greg realized what was happening. They weren't just bankrupting him, they were prosecuting him. Catherine knew about the pension borrowing. Of course she did. She used to balance his books before he hired professional accountants who just told him what he wanted to hear. She had warned him 5 years ago. Greg, don't leverage the pension fund. It's too risky. He had told her, stick to the flower arrangements, Cat. I know business. Now that business was about to send him to prison. Greg ran out of the bar. He had to get to her. He had to beg. He had to convince her that he was sorry, that he loved her, that he was a fool. He hailed a cab. The Plaza Hotel, fast. He knew she was staying there. He arrived at the plaza disheveled and frantic. He tried to run to the elevators, but two massive security guards blocked his path. "Mr. Montgomery," one of them said, "you are not permitted on the premises." "I need to see my wife, ex-wife, Catherine," Greg shouted, causing tourists in the lobby to stare. "Catherine, please!" The elevator doors opened, but it wasn't Catherine. It was Sebastian. He walked calmly across the marble floor, stopping 3 feet from Greg. He looked at Greg with an expression of mild distaste, like one looks at a cockroach. "She doesn't want to see you, Greg," Sebastian said quietly. "You're ruining me," Greg screamed, tears streaming down his face. "You took my company. You took my reputation. Now you're trying to put me in jail? Over a divorce?" Sebastian stepped closer. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "You think this is about the divorce? You think this is because you left her?" Sebastian shook his head. "Men leave their wives every day, Greg. It's pathetic, but it's not a crime. No, this isn't about you leaving her. This is about what you did after." Sebastian checked his watch. "You humiliated her. You stood in a room full of her peers and called her worthless. You tried to strip her of her dignity to boost your own fragile ego. You made her a punchline." Sebastian's eyes darkened. "Catherine is the love of my life. I waited 20 years for her. And when I finally got her back, she was broken because of you. You made her think she was nothing. So I am simply returning the favor. I am showing the world exactly what you are without her." "Please," Greg sobbed. "I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. Just don't call the DA." "Please." Sebastian considered this. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Catherine anticipated you might say that. She is merciful, more than I am." He held out the paper. "This is a surrender of assets. You sign over the rights to the Greenwich house so she can give it to your children, debt-free. You sign over your remaining liquid cash to the employee pension fund you raided, and you leave New York forever." "If I sign it?" Greg asked, his voice trembling. "If you sign it, the clerical error regarding the pension fund remains an internal matter. We don't call the DA. You stay free, but you stay broke, and you stay away." Greg looked at the paper. It was his complete and total defeat. He would have nothing. No penthouse, no company, no status. Just the clothes on his back and a one-way ticket to nowhere. "And if I don't sign?" "Then the police are already on their way," Sebastian said simply. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Greg grabbed the pen. He signed the paper against the wall of the lobby, his signature shaking. He handed it back to Sebastian. "Tell her," Greg started, then stopped. "Tell her I know now. I know she built me." Sebastian pocketed the paper. "She knows you know. That was the point." Sebastian turned and walked back to the elevator. He didn't look back. Greg stumbled out of the Plaza Hotel. He stood on the sidewalk where, just a week ago, he had felt like a king. Now, he was invisible. The paparazzi didn't even raise their cameras. He wasn't a story anymore. He was a footnote. He walked towards the subway. He didn't have money for a cab. 1 year later, the scene opens on a sunny terrace in Lake Como, Italy. Catherine is sitting at a table covered in blueprints. She looks vibrant, her hair loose, wearing a simple linen dress. She is laughing at something Sebastian is saying. He is pouring wine. They look happy, not the performative happiness of social media, but the quiet, solid happiness of two people who know the value of time. A young woman approaches the table. It's a reporter from Vanity Fair. "Mrs. Kincaid," the reporter asks, "your foundation has just opened its 50th shelter for displaced families. You've been called the new queen of philanthropy. Do you have a comment on your success?" Catherine smiles. She looks at Sebastian, then at the camera. "Success isn't about how much you have," she says. "It's about knowing your value. For a long time, I let someone else set my price. I let the market tell me I was depreciating. But the truth is, real value doesn't expire. It just needs the right appraiser." She takes Sebastian's hand. "And what about your ex-husband?" the reporter asks tentatively. "Greg Montgomery? Do you know where he is?" Catherine's expression doesn't change. There is no anger, no bitterness, just indifference. "I believe he's managing a small golf course in Florida," she says politely. "I hear he's finally learning to appreciate the quiet life. I wish him well." The camera pans out over the sparkling blue water, leaving the couple in their paradise. And that, my friends, is why you never, ever bet against a woman who knows her worth. Greg Montgomery thought he was trading in a used car, but he ended up crashing his own life while Catherine drove off in a Rolls-Royce. It's a brutal lesson. Arrogance creates the fall, but dignity builds the throne. If you enjoyed this story of karma, revenge, and redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they are a masterpiece, not a trade-in. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss the next juicy story. I'll see you in the next one.